version. Yeah,
that's very fine-grained information compared to how we in an interview would just say, "What did you do last week?" You know,
right.
So it's way more information. And I guess the key of what you're talking about is it has to serve some purpose towards studying a practice that you're or practices that you're interested in for some reason, right? That's the other side of the story. From focusing on the methods, it's also you have a reason for doing certain access of things. Yeah, did you have any specific reasons for your digital methods for your study that you did in your PhD, for example, that you could elaborate on?
I mean, the idea was to really trace how things change over time. And then it didn't work out because none of the ventures eventually grew. They all gave up. So in a sense, then I was there and trying to make sense of it. So I think for me, the focus was always on not so much actually on the nitty-gritty details of engaging in one particular practice, but rather how the arrangements of practices and the nets of practices that Chasky also talks about, how they develop and change over time, what is being added. But yes, I mean, it is a struggle to, on the one hand side, it sounds like, well, great access to information. But I think because I was so naive as a PhD student, I didn't have a real purpose in mind. And that's where I bit myself in my own tail, so to speak, at the end. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. And that's also what I write in the chapter. I wouldn't recommend only going out and starting to collect data. Nowadays, I would advise everybody to really think about why do you need that data and how will it help you to make sense of what you're curious about. Yeah. But it's all there. That's what I'm trying to say, right? It's all there and accessible.
I think I like how Heiko put it in the comments, data asphyxiation. That's definitely possible with digital methods, it seems like.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Okay, how about Catherine? I think you have a question, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Thomas. I just a comment initially, I just found it really encouraging. I guess I was starting to conduct my ethnography for my PhD March 2020, so just when the lockdown hit. So I had to move online and then ended up doing a hybrid kind of model. And so I guess I got propelled into using a lot of digital methods you've explained in your presentation accidentally, but actually have found it's provided great insight, as you've just illustrated in your presentation, that I would have missed otherwise. But also just kind of reflecting on the nature of work in the future, you know, as we're doing this today. And even though I then went back onto the site to do physical observations, a lot of the time I was observing people working digitally together. So the work was still happening on Miro, on Java, even though they were gathered around a table together. So I think it's kind of almost necessary actually for organizational ethnography going forwards to take this kind of digital and physical approach. So I just found that really encouraging, and thank you for that for the presentation. And then I guess my question was just picking up on Heiko's point there, so I don't want to steal your thunder, Heiko, but yeah, I guess, and just picking up on your comment you made towards the end there, Thomas, as well. I guess I felt slightly overwhelmed by how much data I collected, having access, you know, to these kind of digital artifacts as well, and digital processes of organizing. So yeah, just your reflections on that really in terms of managing the data. And as you said, you kind of took an approach of collecting the data and then figuring out what was useful later. So yeah, in hindsight, I guess some of your reflections on what you might do in the future, and also how you just managed, you know, the pure amount of data that you'd accumulated.
Well, I didn't, because it isn't published, right? So, so obviously I did something wrong.
Hypothetically,
but it also reflects a bit onto Inge's onto Inge's comment right now, right? I completely agree. I mean, that was why in the beginning I collected so much data from various different types of sources, because I thought, like, I cannot know what is relevant in advance, and I agree with that. And I think what it then requires is the work of analysis, and just going through, sifting through your data, trying to make sense and trying to find out well, what's interesting here? And interestingly, at the end of the day, and that's, I think, what also keeps me pushing back from, or what reviewers have then been pushing back from my data. The thing that I found interesting, I actually found out I was missing one data source that was quite important. Because what I figured out is that the feedback interactions where entrepreneurs meet other external stakeholders, those are the interesting ones. And I saw that the artifacts that they used in those interactions sort of influence or shape the interaction as such. So what type of feedback they get, how they will end up reacting to it, and so forth. But I didn't have very consistent data on the feedback. And I think that is what kept me at the end of the day publishing this so far, and in what you would call mainstream journals, or more mainstream journals. But at the same time, I know about it now, right? So the next research project, and I think that's this iterative project, this iterative process of doing research. I mean, now for the next time I can say, well, that's where I focused on. I only focus on this interaction. And then we also address, I think, the question of what practice do you then decide to zoom in? And for me, it was just, spending, I mean, I spent some time in Australia, and I think it was 1.5 months only working on that data and trying to make sense of it. And then, to find out, well, I'm missing an important piece. But that's how it goes sometimes, Wow.
Emma.
Thanks. I'm just reflecting, Thomas, on a sort of undercurrent which I feel has run through today, and wondering about your thoughts. And the undercurrent is about how we calculate and decide whether or not to take methodological risks. And I think this is really interesting because it came through in the publishing discussions about, the need to innovate, but the need to innovate in a calculated way. And at the same time, doing a PhD, I think is an opportunity to take certain calculated risks. And if the messages that PhD students get are to avoid all risks because you won't get published in top journals if you do that, then our field is poorer for it. The field of entrepreneurship research is poorer for it. But also, I think you're kind of alluding to this in what you say at the end of the last comment, when you say, but I've learned something which I'll take forward into the next piece of research I do, which for me signals a sort of understanding of research as a continuous practice itself. If we are practicing research, if we are thinking about it as a field of practice, then it's continually improvised and it's continually learned and relearned. So how do you calculate risk? That's my question.
I don't think you can calculate. I'm completely with you on that. And I really much enjoyed your talk this morning as well, because it was so refreshing and it was bold. And I sort of reflected myself in that, and I said, yeah, we need to take the risk. And who cares about calculations? I mean, it's easy to say, right? If one is in a position where one perhaps has to care less about promotions and getting a job. But I agree to some extent. I, as a PhD student, I didn't necessarily think about whether this will get me a job or not. I just thought, well, that's interesting. That's what I want to do. And sometimes it ends up positively, sometimes it fails badly, but that's life. I mean, that's just chaos unfolding there. So I'm all about embracing it. And that's why I'm saying, look at all the different types of stuff that is out there. And there's so much stuff in other fields that they are doing with digital devices. And I think we can connect them with analog methods and with taking pictures and with so much more. I mean, also, yeah, we've for instance, we have tried out like the 360-degree cameras now to conduct research, to really capture the interactions on both sides of the table, right? So yeah, but that also requires a new approach, because if you analyze it, how do you move between the different angles and so forth? So yeah, but I'm all with you. And especially as a PhD student, I think, yeah, it's nice if you're in a context that encourages you to be bold and to try out things. And I was lucky to be in such a context. Yeah. and to still am in such a context.
I guess to think like a risk analyst, risk implies possibility of failure. And so to hedge your possibility of failure, it's good to have less risky investments. So that implies you having like a portfolio of projects that are way experimental, that you're really passionate about, but have a higher risk of not working out, with balanced with those in your portfolio of projects that are maybe a little bit more conservative in nature, that you hope to maybe not make it into a top journal because it may not have enough innovation, but it at least gets you into the publishing environment and having published papers and things like that, because reputation and having published things matters a lot for your social environment, but also you psychologically, to have some publications means a lot to you as a person as well. So I would say it would be this is a balance to you. I'm noting that if you went full experimental, then if we don't have systems to help support those that don't work, projects that don't work out, then we might just be putting too much undue pressure and on PhD students, where it's not really fair if there's no support in that sense. On the other hand, I very much agree that it could easily turn into like a conservative situation. I've had, when I was doing my PhD, a lot of conversations with American colleagues that were like really dissuading to get into practice theories because it was too risky. That was the only rationale. It's too risky. There wasn't anything about the content or discussing the theoretical possibilities, or it was just too risky. And I felt like a visceral negative reaction to that kind of comment. I'm like, well, that's just a really narrow way of thinking about social science. So
because it's not an entrepreneurial way of thinking, it's a managerial way of thinking. Entrepreneurs do not face risk, they face uncertainty. And I think that's a very, very true sort of statement for me that orients my work. Is like, entrepreneurship is about dealing with uncertainty. And that's exactly the situation where you will end up with if you try out new things. You don't know the outcomes, and you don't know the probabilities of those outcomes becoming true. So you cannot calculate risk. It's only as you can go along and discover things, and you try out things, and you find that some things work, some things don't work. But it's so important what you say. Our environments have to change. They have to promote, they have to have structures in place that enable us to take risk and to be bold without falling, at the end of the day, falling out of the system. Because if everything we do is to push people out of the system systematically, the system itself, there will be very little innovation. Journals will look the same as they do since, I don't know, 1960s. When I open a paper today, it's a PDF, but it doesn't really look different than a paper that was published in 1980. And I mean, I think to some extent, the discussion this morning with the editors was also interesting, because it said, like, I think it was very traditional. It was very traditional perspectives. Despite these three people being interesting scholars and trying out new things, it's still the same journal paper, right? They are restricted by the publishers. So, and on the other hand side, we see websites and we see web developers who work with innovating user experience, user interactions. They create amazing things. Is that not knowledge? Isn't that not a way to represent knowledge, right? Isn't Betsy's slide today, despite only being pictures, a theory and knowledge? It's like, yeah, I think we can be bold and even bolder.
They seem willing to be challenged, though.
Huh?
They did seem willing to be challenged.
Yes, within certain boundaries, right?
Yeah, true.
Of an A4 or US letter format. That's like, yeah. Anyways, I think we're enjoying our time here, and it's 4:15.
Yeah, and we kind of already moved into a reflexive discussions. So if we want to continue doing that for a few minutes, that's completely fine with me. We're done with all the presentations, so please, we can have just we can continue this kind of conversation if people want to keep talking. If you need to go online, thank you very much for coming. It was wonderful, especially Emma, to join us all day. Fantastic to have you with us. So I'll say my thank yous now, but don't take this as you need to leave the room. We can continue talking. We have some space to discuss.
Agnieszka has a question, I see, or some point to raise, whatever.
Yes, hi, thank you. So question from a PhD candidate that frames it appropriately, and someone who was a Teamster along a strong union representative in the States and a previous entrepreneur. On the topic of risk and being bold, could risk also be mitigated through social support from one's institutional colleagues, alliances, or coordinated efforts? So this is a newbie question, but asking if there's, if you experience or see that, or.
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Could you reformulate it, maybe?
Well, on the conversation of being bold and risky, taking risks that represent a challenge to one's career and moving forward. And I hear this conversation, and I also often get the sense of researchers acting independently as individual researchers, but I'm wondering if there is a practice of researchers mitigating that risk to their careers and taking bold research opportunities by forming social support alliances or coordinated efforts.
I think that's an open question to our entire group, right?
Yes.
I mean, we can try to do that. At the same time, there is all the institutional forces as well that are being put up on us by the university system.
Exactly. So this question of forming social support to try to buffer against the institutional pressures.
Yeah, but at the same time, not all institutions are the same. And I think it's also worthwhile to consider, where do we want to end up and why? And does the institutional setting that I apply for fit my sort of, what I want to do, right? So for instance, I mean, my university didn't have the requirement that I need to have published XYZ amounts of papers in order to get an assistant professorship. And they don't require me to do this to get tenured. I mean, here in Sweden, for instance, there are still many universities where there is no such formal tenure system, that you have the risk of getting fired or staying in an endless loop of temporarily limited positions if you don't publish X amount of research by the time. Why? And I think it's worthwhile to fight that such contexts remain and are also being retained. So that will be my immediate reactions to it. But I mean, there might be other opinions in the room.
I think, it's an interesting point that you raised. It's hard to think of like a way to do it structurally to support, like with money for what we're talking about. But I think on a more team level thing, working with co-authors of different capabilities and different experiences and expertise helps you gauge, the novelty that's needed to communicate a new idea or new insight or add something to a conversation without going down a rabbit hole that could have been avoided, for example. So having people with experience with publishing novel ideas will very much help, I think, younger PhDs as well to navigate that judgment of where's the novelty and then where is it not coming together, where is the experiment kind of got off the track. So I would say that's maybe more of a pragmatic answer than a structural answer.
And someone is talking about this in the chat too, like finding your groups, your niches, right, within like the broad entrepreneurship, for example, or within the broad research methods. And then just the conversation we're having, which is very constructive and supportive, right? So I found this, this home in the Entrepreneurship as Practice conference that I really appreciate. And there's another one actually where I met Imabel a few years ago, the Qualitative Research in Organizations and Management, which usually meets in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Beautiful landscape too. And it's a small conference too. And, I should tell you, when I met him, I was presenting a paper that had just been rejected at AMJ. And I was having an existential crisis and really considering just quitting academia because I'm Portuguese, so I'm a bit, dramatic like that. So, and then the feedback that I got from the session after presenting was super constructive and supportive, and it was like, yeah, you can do this, you can be creative and still publish. And eventually the paper just got published at Organization Studies, so that's good. But it takes sometimes someone just telling you, no, don't give up, just go for it, and so that support is really important. And I'm really glad that we keep doing these types of conferences. For me, it was those two conferences that really have helped me and drive me through the process.
Thank you.
I think perhaps we need like a digital journal and the others. It's like, can't your wife is a website developer, right? Isn't she?
Are you talking to Neil?
Yeah, yeah.
Does websites?
Yeah, she did the EAP website, right? Why don't we do like a entrepreneurship as practice website based journal where we publish like all the snippets that don't make it into the papers, That might be one thing. I would be really curious to think about it, like seriously.
It's super easy to add a page on that website and then just populate it with content. So
right,
that's the lowest threshold way to do it.
The Padlet.
A what? Sorry.
Padlet is particular software where you can do all sorts of things, from comments to mini blogs to people can access it freely and see it. Padlet.com, Padlet. It's good fun. I use it sometimes for teaching as well, but it's good for conferences.
Nice. It's a really good idea. We're always looking to do things differently. So keep bringing it on. If you have any crazy ideas, shout it out. Emma, go ahead.
Thanks, Neil. I just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me into your very friendly Entrepreneurship as Practice community, as someone who's not entered into it before, and say I really do hope to keep in touch with you and think about things. I've increasingly, and especially through the craft research, thought about how our subdisciplines are quite siloed unnecessarily, and I think that one of the ways that we can support each other is sometimes by breaking down those silos a bit more. So I'm going to leave in the next couple of minutes, but I just want to say thanks.
Thank you. Breaking down silos, yeah, that's a good one. I think personally myself, I always join a lot of different communities. So try to go to SAP functions, join OMT events that are interesting, qualitative analysis sections and groups that are meeting online. I think that in that way you can see what's going on in the field in a broader way. So I think that's really important as well. You don't need to just be a member of EAP, for example, which would be kind of weird, in my opinion. I don't know how everybody else feels about that.
We're all people together, Yes, you're right. Okay,
well, any last words from anybody online or in the room? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much for our speakers. Betsy, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Inga, for your talk earlier, Thomas, and Irina. I don't know if she's here still or not, but thank you all. We'll see those people maybe tomorrow or definitely for the PDWs and the pitches. If we don't see you tomorrow, then thank you for joining EAP. We'll be in touch. So for the people here, we're done for today. We're, I think, going to, all of us here are going to dinner, I think. So we'll all see each other. Same plan, 7 o'clock at the restaurant. The address is in the program. I'm gonna stick around and do some work for a little bit.
We have a meeting.
Oh yes, we have a meeting, of course. Yes, we have our meeting. If you wanna, I don't know, you can hang out here and go home or whatever until 7. It's just up to you. If you wanna go with us.
I know I go to a meditation class.
Nice.
So I'm not gonna join them.
I'm jealous.
Unfortunately out for tonight.
Okay.
My wife's here as well.
Nice.
This night promised.
Cool.
going to, yeah,
No problem. Well, enjoy your night on the town. And
yeah, thank you.
let me stop the recording.
Yeah,
Bye, Betsy.
what everybody needs to know about.
Yeah, we all-
Thanks so much.
Thanks.